All right, kidney, ureter, bladder, urethra. All right, we are going into the anatomy of that and the physiology of that today, and then we'll do acid-base today as well, okay? So, any questions before we start? Okay, awesome. The other nice thing about getting into this is, once again, you'll have a little background before you do it in lab, which is nice, like A&P1, where everything is just sort of disjointed. Why this little chair so it's going to irritate me. So, here we go. Kidneys are more than you think, though. Okay, obviously, it's going to create urine to be excreted, but it also helps to sense blood pressure. It'll release a hormone called erythropoietin, and I wrote it up on the board here. Of course, I just turned off the light, and now you need it. Okay, erythropoietin is the hormone. I was looking through the notes. I thought I had this in the notes further, but I don't believe I do. Maybe I do, and I read through all the notes. Is a hormone which will increase blood cell production and helps to regulate blood pressure. Okay, that's the hormone that's released from the kidneys. The reason this is important, have we talked about perfusion? Okay, perfusion is a concept that you need to, so P-E-R, just like it sounds, F-U-S-I-O-N, perfusion. That you need to have a certain blood pressure to push out into the tissues, right? You need to be able to keep a certain blood pressure within the cardiovascular circuit. So when we filter substances out, there's enough oomph behind it to push whatever needs to get into the tissues out to the tissues. But that is true also of the kidneys and other systems as well. You need to have a certain amount of pressure pushing through that cardiovascular circuit so we have enough blood pressure to filter through the kidneys. Are you with me? Okay. If the kidneys sense that the blood pressure is getting too low to keep filtering, because we filter all of our blood every few minutes, right, through the kidneys, it'll release erythropoietin, make more red blood cells, okay, and increase blood pressure. Are you with me? There's other ways that increases blood pressure as well. Is that up there? It's not, but we'll get into it because it's a whole system we should know about. Okay, so the kidneys really need a constant, sufficient supply of blood coming through them to filter, to clean that blood, and to get the urine out. But it's also a huge regulator with acid base. That's why I put that little acid base tutorial in there. Are you with me? Okay, so there's a lot that happens there. It also is one of the main regulators of vitamin D and creators of vitamin D. It works very closely with the liver to make vitamin D. Where does that whole system start though? How do we create vitamin D if we're not taking it in our food? The sun, okay? That is, if you take nothing else from this class, vitamin D. Vitamin D, they are finding, is so correlated with diseases when vitamin D levels are low. It's amazing, okay? Obviously, we think of osteoporosis. They're linking low levels to cancer. They're linking low levels to MS, depression. It's unbelievable. So my advice to you is living in a place that has less sun than Seattle. Did you know that? Yeah. You didn't know that? Yeah. Less sun than Seattle. Ooh, we're number one. Take your vitamin D. Make this note as well. Link it with K2. Okay. That form of potassium, Robert, I know you're such a good supplement person, aren't you, right? Am I preaching to the choir right now, Robert? Yeah. So important to have both of them because vitamin D will help the absorption from the intestines. K2 will help to deposit it into your bones instead of where? Into your blood vessels. Okay? And one more thing while I'm on this and totally off the tracks. I suggest you don't get calcium from a supplement, get it from your food. The supplements they're finding are depositing into your blood vessels because it's not the right absorption, get it from your food stuff. Like I'm a huge vitamin person. My husband's like, oh my gosh, because I have 5,000 bottles of them, will not take calcium. Okay, there we go. They're totally totally sidebar, but important stuff, okay? So anyway, the kidneys and the liver do this very intricate dance where they'll take cholesterol that's begun the transformation from sun, from our skin, and convert it into the viable and bioavailable form of vitamin D, okay? All right, we good? Okay, so it's more organs than you think. The anatomy, we're gonna go over this in lab. It's super straightforward. It's a very simple, straightforward lab. I wanna ask you, are the kidneys peritoneal or retroperitoneal? They're retro. And we went over that whole serous membrane enveloping. Remember that when I showed you peritoneal and when the peritoneal get kind of sucked into those serous membranes. The thing that happens, I don't bring the right scarf today, but I think you get the idea, is even though they are behind the peritoneal membranes, what happens with the kidneys is those peritoneal membranes kind of push them back, okay? If you can envision that, right? Almost like if somebody were to take a bunch of tape and tape me up to the wall, right? The kidneys are held into place with those serous membranes. They're also held up by fat. People who are severely anorexic can get a dropping of the kidneys. A dropping, it's called ptosis. You don't say the P. Okay, ptosis would be a clinical word that would be good for you to learn. It's not ptosis, it's ptosis. Because you could get ptosis of the eyelid as well with a stroke. Okay, you can get ptosis of the kidneys in severe anorexia. It's usually the top lid, by the way, just so you know. You'll see they look like they're semi-winking. And neurological diseases, Bell palsy, things like that can happen with it as well. People with severe anorexia can lose the fat around the kidneys. You'll see when you dissect the kidneys, there's a lot of fat around them, and they can toast or they can go down. And that's a bad thing because right off the kidneys, connecting from the kidneys to the bladder, we have the what? What are those tubes? Ureters. Right? So they're pulled pretty tight. If the kidney drops, what's going to happen to that tube? It can actually kink, right? And if we kink it, then what will happen to that urine? Come back and you get something called hydronephrosis, okay? So like bad stuff, we don't want that to happen, okay? All right? Now, in addition to, is it easier if I turn off the light for you to see? Okay, that's what I thought. There, okay? So we have the kidney. The renal pelvis is the area out of which the ureter and the blood vessels go into and out of the kidney. The hilum is kind of the collection of them. We'll go over that in lab. And then the the ureter comes down. And what the ureter actually does is it comes under the bladder. Okay? And then there's a little sphincter there. Okay? And the bladder is basically a muscular bag, and then we excrete urine throughout, or from the bladder through the urethra. Okay, so the anatomy is pretty straightforward and simple. One of the other things that I do want to earmark for you is the aorta, and what is this vein? What is this major vein that drains the lower extremities? No, it's going to go into the subclavian. It's going to meet up. Well, no, actually, no, it's going to go on the underside of the liver. It's not superior. It's going to be inferior vena cava. If that is not on the tip of your tongues, you need to go back and study cardiovascular, ladies and gentlemen. I'm telling you, I'm giving you all the goodies you need to know. Go back and study. Okay? Inferior vena cava. So the aorta is what sided? Left or right? Left. Inferior vena cava is right. Okay? So this would be the renal vein. You can't see them, but off the aorta is the renal artery. You also have the suprarenal glands, which we've already spoken about, completely separate, but wait here, let's take a look at them. Going to and from them are the suprarenal arteries and veins. Okay, just to give you some of that anatomy there. Okay? Over what blood vessels do the renal or do the ureters go? Common iliacs. The reason I mention that is because if they go in to do surgery in this region, it's a little bit of a tricky thing, isn't it? Okay? All right. Go back, start studying, kids. I know it's Monday and all, but. All right. One final thing, those ureters, as they come under, it's to help prevent backflow. So they come underneath, okay? There's a sphincter there, so even if a little bit comes back, okay, it'll get caught in that little loop and it gets pushed forward. Okay. Any questions about that anatomy? We'll be going over more of that in lab as well, where it is in the torso, etc. All right. Here's a picture of them in cross section, looking down and in. Excuse me. Here are the vertebra, or a vertebra I should say, and you can see how the blood vessels, the aorta and the inferior vena cava are right in front of it, and how they'll give off their branches to the kidneys. And this is a nice picture because it shows that retroperitoneal placement of them with those serous membranes on the front. Okay. You can see there's, they call it an adipose capsule around there, supporting them and helping to keep them in place. Right. There we go. So which renal artery is longer? The right, because the aorta is on the left. Which renal vein is longer? The left, because the inferior vena cava is on the right. Is everybody following what I'm saying? What sits atop the kidney? The adrenal glands. Very good. Obviously, we've answered this a couple times. Is that part of the kidney, physiologically speaking? Nah, just happens to be there. It's sort of like the parathyroid glands, right? They're invested in the back part of the thyroid, but completely separate endocrine glands, okay? What happens when we lose too much fat? Those kidneys can drop or toast, right? What will happen to the ureters? They can twist or kink. And then that leads to hydronephrosis, which is a backup of fluid into the kidneys. We don't want that, right? We want to keep that going one way. That's waste. We want to get that out. Does it all make sense? Good. As you start to move into nursing, as a quick sidebar, do not forget that all of my videos are on YouTube. You know you're going into the cardiovascular one, watch the video quick. You'll look like a superstar, right? If you just spend that hour or two watching the videos. It's part of the reason I put them on YouTube, okay? All right, so internal anatomy. The blood is gonna enter the kidney through what vessel again? The blood will enter the kidney, we just talked about it. The renal artery, and it comes off the what? We're gonna take blood to organs by arteries, right? Leaves the heart by arteries, it's also going to go to arteries are going to bring clean, nourished blood to organs. Are you with me? So off the aorta, taking that fresh blood to the kidneys, okay? I know that seems weird because the kidneys are going to filter them, but that's just how it goes. Okay, is going to be the renal artery. Okay? The renal artery then needs to get smaller. You're not going to transfer things in and out of arteries. They're byways. They're going to carry things places. So that needs to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. I'm not going to make you memorize every one of these steps, so make note of what I tell you out of these steps. Okay? So aorta to renal artery. Okay? And then just realize it gets smaller, 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 smaller until it gets to what's called the afferent arteriole. The afferent arteriole will then turn into what's called the glomerulus. There are 1 million of glomeruli in the kidneys. I'm going to show you exactly where they are in a little bit. And they are going to be the capillaries that start to push all the junk out of the blood. Okay? That'll start to create urine. Does that make sense? Are you with me? Now, is everything going to filter out into the urine? No. We're going to send some of it back. Right? We're going to release some of that junk and send it back. It will then go out what's called the efferent arteriole. So far all you need to know is renal artery, afferent arteriole, glomerulus, singular, glomeruli, plural, back into the efferent arteriole. Where is this efferent arteriole going? It's going back into the what? The bloodstream. I'm telling you, this is 90% of the confusion with the kidney right here. Whether it goes back into the bloodstream or it turns into urine. So just get that concept right now. Because not everything is going to be filtered out and put into the urine. Yeah. Some of it will go back into the bloodstream. Right? Is everybody with me on that? Okay? Yeah? Okay, so efferent arteriole is going to be heading back into the bloodstream. Are you with me there? Okay. It will then go into what's called the peritubular capillaries and vasa recta. I'm going to talk to you about this in the future. Okay? Because some things are actually reabsorbed at this point. Don't worry about it right now. We'll talk about it in the future. Okay? Is everybody with me? And then you skip all this, back to renal vein, inferior vena cava. So basically, I think, all this can go. Unless you want to memorize it. Okay? I think the key players are the ones that I just spoke to you about. I think the concept knowing that it will go from big to small is important, because then at that small interface is where we have the filtration at the glomerulus. Are you with me? Right? Aorta and inferior vena cava are large. We're not going to filter things through those. We've got to get it to a size of a capillary, that 1 cell thick. And you do remember a capillary is 1 cell thick, right? Okay? You do now, right? Okay. All right? So do you get that gist? Yes, no? Of how the blood flows in and out? Yeah? Right? Did I? Hold on a second. Completely forgot to go over the inside of it. Go back 1 side, please. Excuse me. Okay, so you will in lab take that little kidney and cut it in half, but we also have models that are a little bit easier to see the inside of the kidney. Okay, so we need to talk about those structures on the inside of the kidney. And the outside of anything that we've spoken about so far is called begins with a C. Cortex. This inner portion where we see all these structures would be called the medulla. Okay? So what happens is blood vessels come in, they branch out through the whole area of the kidney, and they start to get smaller, 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 and eventually they're going to form capillary beds, teeny tiny capillary beds that are called glomeruli. Are you with me? Does that make sense? Okay? And that's part of what will be called the nephron. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay? So cortex, medulla, these areas are called pyramids because somebody thought they looked like little triangles. Okay? This will be where a lot of the filtration happens in these pyramids. It'll be filtered and then it moves towards the center of the kidney. This is hard to see on this picture, but there are spaces in here. And those spaces will collect this filtrate that has made its way to the point of these pyramids. Are you with me? And just at the point of the pyramids, we have something called minor calyx or calyces. C-E-S would be plural. Okay? So at the tips of these, we have minor calyces or calyces. And when we form two or more, they form a major calyx. That's all the difference is. So the way I teach it in my lab is if I'm pointing right to the tip of a pyramid, that space, that would be a minor. If I point to a space where many of them meet, it would be a major calyx. Does that make sense? No? Katie? Yeah? No? Are we good with that? Okay. So the pyramids are where we start the filtration. The filtration will then filter in the spaces on the inside. Those spaces are called calyces. A minor calyx is right at the tip of the pyramid. Where two or more of them join, it's a major calyx. Yes? No? Does that make sense? Yes? No? Yes? Okay. Are you with me? Okay, so hello. Are you guys okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Everybody's like tired today, aren't they? So it'll then come down to what's called the renal pelvis. The renal pelvis is just this little V-shaped area that's leading its way into the urethra. Okay? Or the ureters, I'm sorry. Okay? Yes, no. Okay, so we have the cortex, which is on the outside that has all the blood vessels. We have the pyramids, which is where filtration happens. That filtrate will then go into the spaces, first the minor calyx, then the major calyx, then the renal pelvis, then into the, what? Ureters. Yes? Okay. All right, stop me if you don't get it. The only other thing that's left on there on the outside is the renal capsule. And you'll see when you dissect the kidney, the renal capsule, it's almost like the skin of a pea. And what that is helpful in doing is adding a layer of protection around the kidney. You don't have those serous membranes around the kidney, right? This is a nice connective tissue layer on the outside of the kidney to provide a little bit of protection for it. Okay? All right. Let me know if you have any questions. So, this will make more sense now. We could get an infection. We'll talk about this. Mostly happens in females. It can absolutely happen in males. But if you are going to care for a female child, when you wipe them, when you change their diaper, you have to wipe from front to back. Because in your feces, you have about 500 strains of bacteria. In the vagina, there's 1 to 200. Okay? Did you hear actually now they're saying urine is not sterile? I don't know. Everything changes. So there might be a little bit of bacteria in the urine, but it's minimal, right? If you think of it, if you wipe a baby from back to front, you're going to drag all that bacteria up to the opening, right? And then that can go into the urethra and then the bladder and then up the ureters to the kidneys and cause an infection. All right? So that's why you're supposed to wipe from front to back when caring for an infant, female infant. Okay? And with the male infant, you always make sure that you have something covering because as soon as it's open, they pee. Just so you know. Sorry, guys. That was a lesson quickly learned as a mom of a boy. So pyelitis will be when it happens into the pelvis and the calyces, or those spaces that we spoke about. If it continues up into the thickness of the kidney where those pyramids are, then it continues to pyelonephritis, because that's where the nephrons are. All right. So if it just stays in the spaces, it would be pyelitis. If it moves into the pyramids, it would be pyelonephritis. If it just stays in the bladder, it would be UTI, or urinary tract infection. Okay. Okay. Any questions about that? You'll see that a lot with patients, unfortunately. Okay. You know, I think, so nervous control comes from the renal plexus. That makes sense because, you know, renal means kidney. I don't know if you remember celiac plexus and least thoracic splenic nerve, but I do want you to remember that this is sympathetic. There's sympathetic control over the kidney. I think that's the most important thing to understand. And what that does is if blood pressure gets too low, sympathetic nervous system kicks in, if you remember this from last semester, and it will constrict the arterioles a little bit, thereby increasing overall pressure. Okay. So kidney is sympathetic. That is something you should remember. You know, the breakdown of where it comes from, I know that might be a little wishy-washy, so sympathetic is what you should remember from that. Okay. So now we're looking at the inside of the kidneys at a point where basically the blood is now going to either go back into the bloodstream or create urine. Okay, so we're going to pull things out of the bloodstream to create urine, or whatever's left in the bloodstream is going to go back into the system. At this point, it's called a nephron, this whole system that we're going to talk about. Okay, and what happens is that afferent arteriole turns into the what again? Glomerulus. And the glomerulus is this little bundle, it's a little bit better, of capillaries. I wish I had a laser pointer. Okay, so this little bundle of capillaries, can you see this now that I've turned off the light? Okay, just like a little network, just like a little capillary bed would be. Okay, and at this point, this glomerulus has different coverings around the capillaries, okay? The cells themselves are called fenestrated because there's little openings in them, okay? Because we do want to let some stuff out, but not like real big stuff like proteins, for example, or blood cells, okay? And then on top of that, we have something called a podocyte, which is a cell that has foot-like, like a podiatrist podocyte, foot-like processes that also cover that capillary layer to be real selective about what's going to get out of that glomerulus. In that glomerulus, you're going to have the blood, right? This is going to start filtering through these fenestrated cells and podocytes. If you just really think of those two things as being almost like bodyguards deciding who's going to get in and out of that bloodstream and into the urine. Okay, they provide a barrier. What is going to be collected in this bubble here? What is that going to be the beginning of? What do you think? It's a real simple answer.
Filtration.
Yeah, I call it filtrate, but keeping it real simple, it's the beginning of urine. So this little capillary bed of the glomerulus has a bubble around it. It's almost like if you think of tubing inside of a huge balloon, right? If water leaks out of that tubing, it's going to go into the space of the balloon. Do you follow that? Okay. That's how we begin to create urine. It's known as filtrate at the beginning. Does that make, can you sort of visualize that? Okay. And then whatever is not filtered out of the blood goes back out by that efferent arteriole back into the bloodstream. Then whatever stays in the bubble starts to create urine. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. At that point, it then goes into these yellow tubes. Okay? Oh, and I'm going the wrong way, aren't I? Here we go. Okay? It goes through these tubes. And if you just follow me for a minute, okay, you're going to have the tube go down, and you're actually in the cortex at this point. So part of the nephrons in the cortex, part of it is in the medulla. We'll go over that once you know the parts. Okay? You have a tube come here. It forms this nice loop, comes back up, okay, curves again, and then goes into the collecting duct. Okay, are you with me? Because I want to go over those tubes now. Okay, I know I'm going really slowly, but it can get very confusing if I don't. Okay, and what's in those tubes again? It's not a trick question, I'm just trying to re-emphasize. You said it before. Filtrate, the beginning of urine. Okay? And it goes through these tubes because at different areas of this tube or this tubing, different things will be reabsorbed into the bloodstream. Are you with me? Okay? Around these tubes, we have capillaries just waiting to reabsorb substances. Okay? Does that make sense? Yes? Okay? So urine comes, first of all, into what's called the proximal convoluted tubule. What does convoluted mean? If I tell this really big, long story with lots of twists and turns, some people call that convoluted. Has many twists and turns. So the proximal convoluted tubule is the twisty-turny part that's closest to the glomerulus. It's the first part that will have that filtrate pass through it. Okay? This is called the loop of Henle, which is, I just flipped it to the next slide. If you look at the next slide, I've got all these words if you want to use those notes. Okay, so proximal, PCT is proximal convoluted tubule. This is the loop of Henle. There's a descending and an ascending limb. Okay, descending obviously would carry urine deeper into the medulla. Ascending carries it back to the cortex. Okay, and the distal convoluted tubule would be that twisty-turny part that's not only furthest from the glomerulus, but the distal convoluted tubule connects to these collecting ducts. Okay. And the collecting ducts are the last part of this tubular system. They'll then carry that filtrate, which is now really urine, into the spaces of the calyces. So once again, I know I'm being slow and tedious, but people get really caught up on this, so I want to make sure you get it. This whole thing is called the nephron. The nephron is the tiny filtration system that we have inside the kidney. The top part of it is found in the cortex. The bottom part, I just said fart, I'm sorry, is found in the medulla. You can tell I always joke that I live in a frat house. You know? Farts are like a big, common, everyday. I'm not saying for me, I'm saying for my kids. My daughter spent the weekend with us this weekend. I'm like, estrogen, estrogen. Even my dog just sat there and looked at her like, hey, it's a girl. Anyway, loop of Henle and the collecting duct will be in the medulla. Okay. We push blood by the afferent arteriole into the glomerulus. We begin that filtrate. It goes into the bubble. I need to tell you the parts of that, but let me finish this first. It then goes into the tubular system by the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubule. At that point, it then goes into the collecting duct. It is urine, it'll go out. Okay? Basically urine. We could actually draw water from it. But, okay? Does that make sense? Okay? And the reason there's all different names to these different parts of the loops is because different substances are reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. Right around this tube are a bunch of capillaries just waiting to reabsorb those substances. Okay? Why would we want the ability to reabsorb substances in this tubular system? What would be one simple answer? Water. You're dehydrated, you'll release a hormone that we'll go over that will let water come out of this tube and right into the capillaries nearby, back into our bloodstream. Okay? For example, there's sodium, we'll talk about acid base. Okay? Good. Do we get the gist of this? Do we get how blood flows in, how we filter it, how urine flows out and blood goes back out? Does that make sense? Okay. Oh, I wanted to talk to you about this one little structure here by itself, because you'll have to look at this in the microscope in lab. So, maybe one more. There. Always opposite for him. Okay, so if we look at that one little bubble structure itself, remember I said it would be like a big bubble with tubing inside of it, right? This whole thing is called the renal corpuscle. Okay. The bubble would be what's called Bowman's, and why Bowman's? Because Mr. or Dr. Bowman discovered it. Bowman's capsule. Okay, and then this would be glomerulus. Okay, so that whole thing is a renal corpuscle. The capillaries on the inside are the glomeruli or glomerulus. And then Bowman's capsule is actually just a layer of squamous cells that encapsulate it. Okay, and then urine would go into here, and what's in here again? Blood, right? Okay, make sense? Are we good? We're ready to move on. Are there any questions whatsoever about that? Good? If you have any questions, of course, you're welcome to come ask me. I think it'd be a really good idea when you're studying to blow this up on your computer and look through those steps and make sure you've got everything, okay? What a long tube, there's a million steps. If you look in your book, it goes very in depth about what goes where, so I kept it kind of simple for you. Clinically speaking, I think one of the most important things is to know that that distal convoluted tubule helps with acid-base balance in the body, okay? All right, we'll talk about what is released in a few slides, in the physiology of it. It also helps with sodium and water reabsorption. So if you're becoming dehydrated at that distal convoluted tubule, when you sense that, your body senses that, it will reabsorb sodium. If you reabsorb sodium, where sodium goes, water goes, right? Okay, and you can put more water back in your bloodstream. Okay. Collecting ducts are going to be that last stop on that tubular network that I showed to you. That also is going to be an area that's used quite often to reabsorb water. There's a specific hormone that'll do that, which you already know. Can anybody guess it? I'll give you chocolate if you know it. Nice! Come see me in lab. All right. I got my Hershey Kisses over there. Okay? So afferent arterioles will go into the glomerulus. We know that already. Efferent go away. Those are the ones that feed the blood into and out of the glomeruli, which should ring a bell. Right? And remember I said around the tubes of the nephron there are capillaries waiting to reabsorb substances. Those capillaries will then lead it back into our bloodstream. The names of those capillaries are peritubular capillaries and vasa recta. Okay? Peritubular capillaries and vasa recta. I think it's one of those times a picture is worth a million words. If you look at this picture up close, it should be labeled here. Yes. If you're looking at the cortex and you've got that distal and proximal convoluted tubules, around those are peritubular capillaries. It's right here in your notes. I don't know if you can read it in your notes, but you would be able to see it on your computer if you pull this up. So it's this one right here. You might want to make a note on here. It'll be around those ones in the, and it should be labeled cortex right up here. Well, this would be the cortex. This would be the medulla, just so you know, okay? In the medulla, we've got the loop of Henle, and the straighter looking ones are the vasa recta, okay? Okay, so vasa recta. So vasa recta will be around that loop of Henle. Peritubular will be around the proximal and the distal convoluted tubules. Okay. They're just waiting to suck those things back up and put them back into the bloodstream if we need them.
You said the vasa recta was in the medulla?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you look at that, you can see the loop of Henle and the collecting duct.
Okay.
I think if you just gaze at this picture for a few minutes, it's going to be very greatly helpful in remembering that.
Okay.
Yeah, you just have to blow it up a little bit on your screen. All right. Any other questions? No? Excellent. We don't have time today. Okay, JG cells. So I think what to take from this is in the distal convoluted tubule, you have different receptors which monitor blood pressure. So your distal convoluted tubule is like the boss of blood pressure in the kidneys. Remember I told you the kidneys need to have a certain amount of pressure. The distal convoluted tubule is constantly monitoring that with something called chemoreceptors. Those chemoreceptors will sense the concentration of blood. If it gets too concentrate, right, it'll call for more water to be put into the bloodstream. The biggest thing that I want to talk to you about is renin. Okay, renin is going to be released from these juxtaglomerular cells, also known as JG cells. Renin is very potent at increasing blood pressure. I'm going to show you that mechanism in kidney physiology. Okay, what I want you to remember is these JG cells are in that distal convoluted tubule, and that they were released renin. Okay? Right? We'll talk about the steps that renin instigates in a little bit. Filtration, going back to that glomerulus, I talked to you about the fenestrated capillaries. So if we were to look at the walls of the capillaries of the glomerulus, there'd be little spaces, okay? And then you'd have those podocytes kind of wrapping around as well, these little foot-like processes. There are two lines of protection that create a selectively permeable membrane. Okay? Then it filters through another membrane into the capsular space. Don't worry about that. Worry about those two. Okay? And the capsular space is the bubble in which we'll start to create and collect that filtrate. Okay? I think the other thing to remember is blood, large plasma proteins should not pass through there. Glucose can pass through there in normal physiology, but then it'll be immediately reabsorbed in a healthy person in the proximal convoluted tubule. You shouldn't find glucose in urine, right guys? Right, okay. If it does sneak out of the glomerulus, it'll be reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule. If you have somebody who has super high levels of serum glucose or dextrose, the proximal convoluted tubule can only reabsorb so much. It just starts to get tired, and then it will filter into the urine. Okay? Does that make sense? If we start to see blood and plasma proteins, what are you thinking? some sort of infection, damage, right? Something's going wrong. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. So, 1,200 milliliters of blood pass through the glomeruli every minute. That's pretty crazy, right? Kidneys use 20-25% of the body's oxygen because they're highly metabolic, right? They're functioning a ton. Boy, and we already talked about this, didn't I? Okay, kind of ad nauseum. The glomerular filtration is going to decide what's going to go into the urine or go back into the bloodstream. Tubular reabsorption will determine what we need to put back into the what? Blood. Excellent. Okay? And then whatever's left goes into the urine and is excreted. Okay? There we go. Any questions on those 3 steps? Do you guys need me to repeat any of that? Yeah? Okay. So glomerular filtration is when we start to filter the blood and create the filtrate that will go into the space. Okay? That filtrate then goes through the tubes of the nephron. At that point, we're going to reabsorb some substances back into the bloodstream. Tubular reabsorption. Whatever is not reabsorbed creates urine and will be excreted. Yes, no? Okay. Does that help? Okay. Good. So I think most of this we've A, covered, or B, kind of makes sense. In the glomerulus, it's a passive filtration, so we don't use what? ATP. We couldn't. I mean, can you imagine the amount of energy we use at this rate? I mean, we're already using a ton of oxygen. Okay? Small molecules pass freely. Glomerular filtration rate can be changed. So I think the thing to keep in mind is those little arterioles that feed it can constrict and dilate, which would change the pressure. Okay? You could kind of turn some areas on and off, but you can also slightly squeeze all of them, which would increase the pressure altogether. Does that make sense, right? We think about a hose in the summer, and if you let the water flow freely, it kind of limps along, but if you cover it and you decrease that diameter, it'll increase pressure. Okay, if you do that throughout the whole kidney, you're going to increase the pressure through the whole kidney, right? In your book, it talks about some other aspects, but just think of it that way, okay? Those JG cells can increase blood pressure. I'm going to show you how in just a second because it's an important mechanism you need to know. And we can also stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, which could increase systemic blood pressure, okay, and push more blood into the kidneys. So the whole gist is to get more blood flow into the kidneys if you need to filter more, okay? That distal convoluted tubule has those JG cells. Do you remember that? Those JG cells and other cells are monitoring how much blood we have flowing through the kidneys and also the concentration of the blood. If they sense that blood pressure is decreasing and we need to increase it, it will release a hormone called renin. The JG cells release renin. Are you with me there? Does that all ring a bell? Okay. Now, renin, when it is released through a very complex series of steps, actually triggers the kidneys. Renin actually triggers a release of what's called angiotensinogen, which will convert angiotensin 1 into 2. Okay, 2 is a more potent form, but both of them, so angiotensinogen is the enzyme that will convert them, okay? And both of them promote vasoconstriction. What does that mean? And this is the whole body. So a vaso refers to blood vessels. Yeah? Yes. If you take all of your blood vessels and constrict them slightly, you're going to increase systemic blood pressure. Okay? You're always kind of turning different areas on and off. Like I just ate, so I'm going to send a little more blood to my GI tract, a little less to my skeletal muscles, right? This is talking about systemic changes, okay? So all of them slightly constrict, which will increase systemic blood pressure, okay? We'll reabsorb sodium and therefore water. So if you're taking that closed cardiovascular circuit and you're retaining sodium and you're retaining water, you're increasing the what in that circuit? The pressure, because you're just putting more fluid there. Are you with me? Okay. Antidiuretic hormone will be released. It'll actually go to those collecting ducts that we looked at. Remember the collecting ducts? And God bless you. You're welcome. Okay. And trigger a response there to put water back into the bloodstream. Okay. There's receptors in the hypothalamus. Tell us to drink more, putting more fluid into the system. Okay. And then we'll release aldosterone from the adrenal cortex, which also helps the retention of sodium and water. Well, it's a triple whammy. So we really protect, right, that level of the blood pressure to keep it adequate so we can keep pushing it through our tissues. Yes? Make sense? Any questions? Excellent. Okay. How am I doing on time? Oh, I'm good on time. Okay. We've touched upon most of this. Total blood filters every 45 minutes. I always think this because, frankly, I have to pee a lot in the morning because I have caffeine, I think. And I think I have a big cup of coffee, and usually within an hour, I have to pee a lot, right? It goes right through. And I'm thinking, well, all of my blood is getting filtered. No wonder, right? Too much information, right? So different areas absorb different substances. If you look in your book, it's extremely complex, so I've tried to narrow it down. I already talked to you about distal convoluted tubule with sodium, water, and acid base. Okay, sodium and water is really absorbed at all areas. Proteins, cations, anions are absorbed in various areas. I'm not going to ask you that. Okay, I'm going to tell you the specific ones that I want you to remember and take with you, which I already started. Glucose is usually only resorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule, which we spoke about. So what little glucose that may spill over into that filtrate or the beginning of the urine will be reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule. I think that's an important thing to know, because you should know that there's not glucose in the urine if you do a test, right, urinalysis. Now, some things are non-reabsorbed or poorly reabsorbed: urea, creatinine, and uric acid. The reason that's important to know is if you have somebody who has a kidney function test done, they will give them like creatinine. You know, they'll measure it out, and then they'll test the urine and make sure that it's excreted at 100% to make sure that filtration system's intact. Are you with me with that? Okay. I talked to you about this in hold on a second. Let me look at something really quick. Okay, so tubular secretion. So talking about acid base. So we remember what acidic and alkalinic means, right? And when we're talking about the pH of the body, it's a very, very important thing. And there's three main areas that help to regulate the acid base of the body, okay? Can anybody tell me what they are? Lungs, respiratory, excellent. What? Kidneys, excellent.
Blood.
Excellent, and blood, okay? Usually people will, very nice job, you know, give you some Hershey kisses next time I see you, okay? So, usually people will sort of call metabolic, by I think truest definition, metabolic is blood and kidneys. People will reference the kidneys as the metabolic, just so you know, okay? I think, I've heard this. And then respiratory obviously will be respiratory. So with the kidneys, they are very integral in helping to balance that acid base, which is brilliant because it's something that's constantly monitoring our body's systemic pH. And we're talking about systemic, okay? We're not talking about like stomach or brain, right? We're talking about our systemic tissues and blood. So we should be maintaining that at what? What's the normal pH? 7.35 to 7.45. All right, is the range. Are you with me? So if the kidneys sense that the body is becoming too acidic, they can compensate by getting rid of what? Hydrogen ions, okay? If the body becomes too acidic, the kidney can get rid of hydrogen ions and retain bicarbonate because hydrogen ions are acidic. Do you remember this from acid base? And HCO3 negative is bicarb, which is basic. So in the kidneys, the two ions that the kidneys will use to regulate pH are H+, which are hydrogen ions, or bicarb, which is HCO3 negative. Do you remember this? Okay, why? Because it's just, for some reason, the way the kidney, and I'm sure if I were a kidney physiologist, I could tell you exactly why, right? But these are the two ions. And don't worry about the countercurrent, don't worry about the potassium and the chloride for now. Worry about the primary hydrogen and bicarbonate, okay? If your body becomes too acidic, your kidneys will try to compensate for that. How would your kidneys compensate for that? They would they get rid of hydrogen or keep it? If your body is too acidic and your kidneys are trying to compensate for it, would your kidneys want to keep hydrogen or get rid of it? Get rid of it. Are you with me? It'll make your entire body less acidic. Same premise. If your body is too acidic and your kidneys are trying to compensate, would they get rid of bicarbonate or keep it? Keep it. It works opposite, right? Okay, so if your body's too acidic, your kidneys will get rid of hydrogen and keep bicarbonate. The bicarbonate will buffer the acidity, getting rid of the hydrogen gets rid of some of the acidity. Does that make sense? If your body's too basic, would you keep hydrogen or get rid of hydrogen? You would keep it. If your body is too basic, would you keep bicarbonate or would you get rid of it? Right? And your body's always doing that dance. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. Now, the reason I talk about potassium and chloride is because usually if you're getting rid of an ion, you're going to have to counterbalance it, if you're wondering what that is. I want you to remember the main drivers. I want you to remember hydrogen and bicarbonate. Okay? All right. So this, just to put it in perspective, would be released from the tubes of the nephron, right? okay? Or kept in the tubes, depending on which one we need. Okay. Concentration in the solution of the kidneys, I think if you take a minute and look at this, it pretty much makes sense. So here's the glomerulus going through that descending part of the loop of Henle. We pull water out so it becomes very what? Dilute or concentrated? Concentrated, right? And then as it starts to come up, we take sodium out so it becomes less concentrated before it goes in, okay? I don't talk much about that, but I think it makes sense, okay? Dilute urine versus concentrated. This is talking about after it comes out, okay? I think you can pretty much figure most of that out on your own, right? Antidiuretic hormone, let's talk about that. So, first of all, antidiuretic hormone is released from where? Posterior pituitary. So it's monitoring the concentrations of solutions in your body, right? If it senses that things are becoming too concentrated and we need more water, antidiuretic hormone is released. It goes to the collecting ducts, is that there? Okay. And that will open these little pores, okay, and the collecting ducts with a substance called aquaporin, okay? And that will allow water to get back out into the bloodstream, and it helps to balance the solutions in the body once again, okay? Does that make sense? So ADH goes to collecting ducts, that releases aquaporin, that actually opens up the pores in the collecting ducts, and allows water to come back into the bloodstream. Yes, no? Any questions on that one? All right, and that would make a more concentrated urine, you understand, right? Because you're going to put the blood or the water back into the blood. Okay, good. Diuretics will stop reabsorption of sodium at the distal convoluted tubule. Sodium is dumped into the ducts and water goes with it. Why do we want to do that? Losing my what? Blood fluid overload, high blood pressure, fluid around the heart, right? Anything that we have excess fluid in the body, we can give them diuretics. Where sodium goes, water goes. What's a little bit of a problem with this though? What else do they lose? Electrolytes, potassium, right? So you have to make sure that they're maintaining proper amounts of those supplements. Good? All right. Any questions on that one? Good. I'm trying to buzz right along because I would like to get through acid-base, that little lecture. So physical characteristics. I think all of this makes sense, so I'm not even going to lecture on it. You can read through it on your own. But let's just talk about specific gravity really quickly. Specific gravity is the comparison of the concentration of something compared to distilled water. And do you know, the reason I go over this is because a lot of people, younger people, don't know what distilled water is. Do you know what distilled water is? Some people don't, I can see it. Okay, so distilled water is water that has been processed and boiled that has no solute in it. So the specific gravity of distilled water would be 1.0. You compare the solutes and solutions to that. Does that make sense? Okay, so the specific gravity of urine should be about 1.001 to 1.035. If somebody has some sort of kidney damage or something going on, you're trying to get, proteins or substances, it would be a higher specific gravity. That's all that means. Okay. The rest of it, color, transparency, I think you guys can read through that on your own. Of course, if you have a question, let me know about it. All right. Chemical composition all makes sense as well. The amount, I just want to make note, and this is what I was debating earlier. Urea is the byproduct of proteins. And the reason I'm making note of this is there's these fads with high protein diets, right? Where you eat a lot of proteins. The problem with that is the nitrogenous side bases of those molecules will through many steps be turned into urea. So if we have high levels of urea, we're putting a lot of stress on the kidneys. Are you with me? So that being said, you know, if somebody's doing a high protein diet, you really need lots of water and you need vegetables and fruit to buffer the amount of stress that's happening in the kidneys. It'll actually help to buffer that. Just as a side note, that's what I was sort of thinking about telling you before. But anyway, okay. Abnormal solutes, we spoke about those. Ketone bodies we'll see in what type of patient? Ketone bodies we'll see in people who are diabetic. Nice. Okay. Ureters, bladder, urethra. Ureters, we know the structure of them. They're lined by smooth muscle, which makes sense because it needs to be autonomic. If a kidney stone occurs, it causes what's called flank pain. Do you know what flank pain is? Yeah, flank pain would be back here, okay? About the levels of the kidney, just so you know. And if they think there's a, who's doing clinicals now? There's some old timers. What's the test if they think there's a problem with the kidneys? What do they do? You haven't seen it? Right. Any inflammation in there? You'll see it. All right, urinary bladder is basically a muscular sac. At the bottom, there's something called the trigone. So the ureters come in and underneath, like I told you, right? And then the urethra is in the front, and that forms a triangle. That triangle is known as the trigone, that space there. Okay. There are rugae, just like the stomach, just folds, which makes sense, right? Because it'll expand and then contract after you urinate. It holds approximately 500 milliliters of urine up to 1,000, at which it will burst. But will it burst? Nah. What'll happen? You'll just pee yourself, right? Right, good times. Okay, good times. Okay. There's an internal urethral sphincter and an external. The internal is smooth, therefore it is involuntary. The external is muscular, skeletal muscle, so it is voluntary. So we're able to control when we urinate. Okay. Micturition, which is urination, is parasympathetic. Occurs when 200 milliliters fills, the bladder contracts gently. That's when you feel you have to go. The two sphincters open, pelvic muscles. There's another thing that I should make a side note about 600. You may have no choice, which we just spoke about. Okay. Underneath the bladder, there's a little diaphragm of muscles, and those muscles help to support the bladder. As we age and have children, that diaphragm of muscles can get damaged or weak, and this is when in females the bladder and or the uterus can prolapse or fall. So that's what happens. And that pelvic basin of muscles, it's what they do with Kegels. Do you ever hear of Kegels where people can contract that and it helps to support, especially after women have had children? So that's another thing that helps to support and control your urination. There's usually 10 milliliters left after you urinate. There's still usually a little bit left. Okay. The kidneys begin low and actually move up. That's why some people congenitally, one may stay down. Somebody was just telling me they had that. They have a low kidney. So if they don't progress up to their full height, you know, the urethra, or the ureters, I'm sorry, can be shortened and they'll have a low kidney. That can happen. You can have a horseshoe kidney where you just have one big kidney right across. People can function perfectly fine. The only reason they find them is because they're doing a study for something else, like a herniated disc, and they're like, oh, you have one kidney, okay? Hypospadias is when the urethral opening of a male is too low. It's not in the correct location. Some males can live with it if it's not too bad. Some, they have to have it surgically fixed. Congenital polycystic kidney. Instead of having good, healthy kidney tissue, you actually get cysts, which are a problem, correct? Because you don't have enough of a filtration system to clean your blood. There's different progressions of this. There are mild, there are more advanced forms of it, unfortunately. Okay. Oh, and then, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I had both of them here. So congenital, you're born with it. They could need a transplant. Adult usually is a little more benign and slow growing. Okay. They may or may not need a transplant depending on how fast it advances. Okay. So let me make note. Actually, you know what? Let me stop and restart. So that is kidneys, ureters, bladder. Any questions on any of that we want to over? I'm going to stop and restart the tape so we can go over acid base.